In a hidden corner of the Swiss Alps, beneath snow-covered cliffs, two bodies lie quietly embracing in the crimson sunset. One of them still has final words lingering on his lips. I have never regretted loving you, even if you hate me for the rest of your life. This is a story about misunderstanding and redemption, about how two men lost each other in the games of power, and how they found the truth again at the moment between life and death. When love turns to hate, when protection becomes harm, when all truths are finally revealed, is there still time to say that long overdue, "I am sorry"? 6 years ago, he said, "Leave this place and never come back." 6 years later, he returned, carrying hatred and the flames of revenge. But fate always loves to play the cruelest jokes. When the truth was unveiled, it was already too late. The first snow of December fell silently over London's financial district, each flake carrying memories that Ethan Blackwood had spent 6 years trying to bury. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, he watched the white veil descend upon the city, his reflection ghostly against the glass. The man looking back at him was no longer the frightened 18-year-old who had been cast out of the Morel mansion 6 years ago. This was someone else entirely, someone forged in the crucible of abandonment and shaped by an unrelenting hunger for revenge. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant's voice cut through the silence. The board meeting with Morel Financial is scheduled for 3:00. Shall I confirm your attendance? Ethan's lips curved into what others might mistake for a smile, but those who knew him recognized it as something far more dangerous. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world, Sarah. After all, I've been preparing for this meeting for 6 years. The irony wasn't lost on him, Ethan Blackwood. The name he had chosen for himself when he arrived in England, discarding the surname Morel, like a snake shedding its skin. He had built his empire from nothing, clawing his way up through London's financial hierarchy with a ruthlessness that impressed even his enemies. Blackstone capital had become a force to be reckoned with, and now it was time to return to the place that had rejected him. Time to face Adrian Morel. The flight to Zurich felt like a journey into his past, each mile bringing back memories he had spent years suppressing. The private jet hummed quietly through the clouds, but Ethan found no peace in the luxury surrounding him. His mind wandered to another winter, another plane ride, this one filled with tears and the crushing weight of betrayal. "You are leaving tonight," Adrian had said, his voice as cold as the Swiss winter outside. "I've arranged for your education in England. I'll have everything you need. But I don't want to leave," Ethan had pleaded, 18 and desperate. "This is my home. You are I am nothing to you," Adrian had cut him off, those steel, gray eyes showing no emotion. "And you are nothing to me, just a burden I inherited when my father married your mother." The memory still burned like acid in his chest. Ethan opened his eyes, forcing himself back to the present. That naive boy was dead. In his place sat a man who had learned that sentiment was a luxury he could afford, that love was a weakness that would only lead to destruction. As the jet began its descent into Zurich, Ethan caught his reflection in the window once more. 6 years had changed him. His face had lost its boyish softness, replaced by sharp angles and an austere beauty that commanded attention. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit tailored to perfection, every detail calculated to project power and success. He looked like what he had become, a predator returning to familiar hunting grounds. The Morel family estate looked exactly as he remembered it, a sprawling mansion of gray stone and dark windows, set against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains. It should have felt like coming home, but instead, it felt like walking into a mausoleum. The memories here were all ghosts now, haunting empty corridors and silent rooms. Ethan's limousine pulled up to the grand entrance just as another car arrived, his breath caught despite himself as a familiar figure emerged from the black Mercedes. Adrian Morel stepped into the falling snow, and for a moment time seemed to stop. He hadn't changed much. Still tall and imposing, still carrying himself with that innate authority that had always made Ethan feel small. But there were subtle differences that Ethan's eye caught immediately. Adrian looked thinner, and there was a wariness around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 years ago. His dark hair, always perfectly groomed, now showed threads of premature silver at the temples. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and Ethan felt that familiar jolt of electricity that had once confused and terrified him. Adrian's expression remained perfectly controlled, but Ethan caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible pause in his stride. Adrian. His voice was exactly as Ethan remembered, deep, controlled, giving nothing away. "It is Mr. Blackwood now," Ethan replied, his tone deliberately formal as he approached. "I trust you received my proposal regarding the merger." If Adrian was surprised by the coldness in Ethan's voice, he didn't show it. "I did, though I have to admit I was surprised by the source." They stood there for a moment, two predators sizing each other up, the falling snow creating a curtain of white around them. Ethan could smell Adrian's cologne, the same expensive scent he had always worn, bringing back unwanted memories of stolen moments and confused feelings that Ethan had spent years learning to hate. Surprised, Ethan's smile was razor sharp. "I suppose you thought I'd disappear forever. Grateful for the generous allowance you provided. Did you really think sending me away would make me disappear, Adrian? That I'd just fade into nothing?" Something flickered in Adrian's eyes, pain perhaps, or regret. But it was gone so quickly that Ethan might have imagined it. "You've done well for yourself," Adrian said quietly. "Blackstone Capital has an impressive reputation." "Yes, it does." Ethan stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around Adrian's eyes, to notice the slight pallor of his skin. "And now I am here to collect what is mine." "And what exactly do you think is yours?" Ethan's smile turned predatory. Everything you took from me. Everything you took from me. Everything you denied me. I am going to watch you lose it all, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but the memory of what you've done. For a moment, Adrian's mask slipped, and Ethan saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. But then the walls went back up, and Adrian was once again the cold, controlled man who had shattered an 18-year-old heart. "Well then," Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral, "I suppose we should go inside. The board is waiting." As they walked toward the mansion's entrance, their footsteps echoing in the snow-covered courtyard, Ethan felt a dark satisfaction settling in his chest. The game had begun, and this time he held all the cards. Adrian Morel was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. What Ethan didn't know was that some games have no winners, only casualties. And sometimes the price of revenge is higher than anyone can imagine. The Morel mansion's grand boardroom had always intimidated Ethan as a child. Its mahogany walls, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, seemed to judge every word spoken within those walls. Now, as he took his seat at the polished conference table, Ethan felt nothing but cold determination. The room that had once made him feel small now seemed just another stage for his carefully orchestrated performance. Adrian sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding, even in the face of what everyone in the room knew was a corporate execution. The other board members, old men who had served the Morel family for decades, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, caught between loyalty to their longtime employer and the harsh reality of Blackstone Capital. This superior offer, gentlemen, Ethan began, his voice carrying the confidence that had made him a legend in London, as financial circles. I appreciate you taking the time to hear my proposal. I know this isn't easy for any of you. He opened the leather portfolio before him, revealing documents that represented months of meticulous planning. Every number, every projection, every clause had been crafted with surgical precision. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a surgical strike designed to cripple the Morel empire. Blackstone Capital is prepared to offer each of you individual packages that far exceed what you could expect from Morel Financial's current trajectory, Ethan continued, his eyes moving around the table before settling on Adrian. The market realities are clear. Traditional family-owned financial institutions are becoming obsolete. You can either evolve or become extinct. Charles Dubois, the longest-serving board member, cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Blackwood, while your offer is generous, we have to consider our loyalty too. Loyalty does pay dividends, Mr. Dubois, Ethan interrupted smoothly, and loyalty certainly does protect your pension when the company goes under, which it will within 2 years, if current trends continue. Adrian had remained silent throughout the presentation, his fingers steepled before him, those steel, gray eyes never leaving Ethan's face. Finally, he spoke. You've done your homework, Mr. Blackwood. I am impressed by the thoroughness of your research into our vulnerabilities. There was something in the way Adrian said the word vulnerabilities that made Ethan's pulse quicken. It sounded almost like an admission, a crack in the armor that Ethan hadn't expected to find so easily. Knowledge is power, Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair with calculated casualness. And I made it my business to know everything about Morel Financial. Everything. The emphasis on the last word wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all Adrian. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign that Ethan's words had found their mark. The meeting continued for another hour, with Ethan systematically dismantling every argument the board could muster. He had prepared for this moment for years, studying every weakness in the Morel empire, every potential point of failure. By the time he closed his portfolio, the outcome was inevitable. Gentlemen, I'll give you 24 hours to consider my offer, Ethan said, standing to signal the meeting's end. After that, the terms become less favorable. As the board members filed out of the room, their whispered conversations filling the air with tension, Adrian remained seated. Ethan paused at the door, looking back at the man who had once meant everything to him. You seriously believe this will work, Adrian said quietly, not turning around. Can I? Ethan moved back into the room, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, they were alone in the space where so many family decisions had been made, where Adrian's father had once presided over empire, building discussions that shaped the financial landscape of Europe. Adrian finally turned in his chair, and Ethan was struck again by how tired he looked. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and a tension in his shoulders that suggested the weight of responsibility was heavier than it appeared. "This isn't just about business, is it?" Adrian asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "This is about us, about what happened 6 years ago." Ethan felt his carefully constructed facade waver for just a moment. The word us hung in the air between them, loaded with memories of stolen glances and forbidden feelings that Ethan had spent years trying to forget. "There was no us," Ethan replied, his voice steady, despite the turmoil in his chest. "You made that very clear when you threw me out like garbage." Adrian flinched as if he'd been struck. "I did. To have a choice." "Everyone has choices, Adrian. You chose to protect your precious reputation over." Ethan stopped himself, unwilling to give voice to feelings he had buried so deep that sometimes he could almost convince himself they had never existed. "Over what?" Adrian stood now, moving closer, and Ethan could see the pain in his eyes. "Over a confused teenager who did. To understand what he was feeling." "I understood perfectly," Ethan said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I understood that I was nothing to you, just a responsibility you inherited and could, too late to dispose of." They were standing close now, close enough that Ethan could see the rapid pulse at Adrian's throat, could smell that familiar cologne that still made his heart race, despite everything. For a moment, the years fell away, and they were just two people who had loved and lost and broken each other as hearts. "You have no idea what you are talking about," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "You never did." "Then enlighten me," Ethan challenged, stepping closer still. "Tell me why you sent me away. Tell me why you looked at me like I was nothing when I begged you to let me stay." Adrian, his hand moved, almost reaching for Ethan's face before he caught himself and let it fall. "Because staying would have destroyed you," he said simply, "and I couldn't watch that happen." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you destroyed me instead. How noble of you." "I protected you, you abandoned me." The words exploded from Ethan's chest, carrying 6 years of pain and anger. "I was 18 years old, Adrian. I had no one else, nothing else. And you threw me away like I meant nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's face had gone pale, and his hand moved to his chest in a gesture so subtle that Ethan almost missed it. Almost. "Are you all right?" The question slipped out before Ethan could stop it, concern overriding anger for just a moment. Adrian's hand dropped immediately. "I am fine," but the slight breathlessness in his voice suggested otherwise. Ethan studied his face, noting the pallor, the way Adrian seemed to be forcing himself to stand straight. A memory surfaced. Adrian's father had died of a heart attack at 55, the same age Adrian was now. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than he intended. "That is none of your concern," Adrian replied. But the deflection only confirmed Ethan's suspicions. A cold realization settled in Ethan's stomach. "You are sick," I said. "It is none of your concern." "How long?" Ethan pressed, all thoughts of revenge temporarily forgotten. "How long have you been hiding this?" Adrian's laugh was bitter, always so perceptive. "It is one of the things He stopped himself, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are making a mistake with this takeover. I'll destroy something that took generations to build." "Maybe it deserves to be destroyed," Ethan said, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The sight of Adrian, a obvious illness had shaken something loose in his chest, something he didn't want to examine too closely. Maybe it does, Adrian agreed quietly. Maybe we all get what we deserve in the end. There was something final in the way he said it, something that made Ethan's chest tighten with inexplicable fear. But before he could respond, Adrian was moving toward the door. The board will accept your offer, Adrian said, without turning around. They won, Ethan. I hope it brings you the peace you are looking for. As the door closed behind him, Ethan was left alone in the boardroom, surrounded by the portraits of Adrian's ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to judge him, to find him wanting. For the first time since he'd begun planning his revenge, Ethan wondered if victory would taste as sweet as he imagined. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the estate in white. It looked peaceful, almost innocent, but Ethan knew that some stains could never be washed clean, no matter how much snow fell to cover them. Chapter 3: Fractures in the Ice. The Morel estate felt like a museum of memories as Ethan walked its familiar halls. That evening, he had been offered guest quarters, a bitter irony considering he had once called this place home. Now, he was just another visitor, albeit one who had come to dismantle everything Adrian held dear. The guest room assigned to him was in the east wing, far from Adrian's private quarters, but close enough to the library where they had spent countless hours during Ethan's childhood. He found himself drawn there now, his feet carrying him down corridors lined with paintings and photographs that chronicled the Morel family's long history. The library looked exactly as he remembered, floor to ceiling bookshelves, a massive fireplace with 2 leather chairs positioned before it, and tall windows that offered a view of the snow-covered mountains. This had been their sanctuary once, the place where Adrian had helped him with homework, where they had talked about everything and nothing, where Ethan had first begun to understand that his feelings for his stepbrother were far from brotherly. I wondered if you defined your way here. Ethan turned to find Adrian standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He had changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. For a moment, Ethan was transported back to his teenage years, when the sight of Adrian in casual clothes had made his heart race with feelings he could name. Old habits, Ethan said, turning back to the window. I used to love this view. Adrian entered the room, moving to the fireplace to light the kindling that had been carefully arranged there. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across the walls and filling the space with warmth. You spent a lot of time in here, Adrian said, settling into one of the leather chairs. Even after I developed an embarrassing crush on you? Ethan finished, his voice deliberately light. Yes, I did. I was a glutton for punishment even then. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. It wasn't embarrassing, he said finally. And it wasn't T1, sided. The admission hung in the air between them, like a confession. Ethan felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack, threatening to expose the raw wounds beneath. Don't, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't do this now. When, then? Adrian asked, looking up at him with eyes that reflected the firelight. When you destroyed everything. When there is nothing left to lose. Ethan moved away from the window, needing distance from the vulnerability in Adrian's voice. You lost the right to honesty 6 years ago when you chose lies and cruelty instead. I chose to protect you. Stop saying that. Ethan whirled around, his control finally snapping. You didn't protect me. You shattered me. Do you have any idea what it was like to be 18 and completely alone in a foreign country, knowing that the person you loved most in the world had cast you aside? Adrian flinched as if he'd been struck. I know you hate me. I don't hate you, Ethan said, the words torn from his throat. I wish I could hate you. It would be so much easier than this. This thing that I can name, can kill, can live with. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Adrian stood slowly, his movements careful, and Ethan noticed again the way he seemed to favor his left side, the subtle signs of pain he was trying to hide. How bad is it? Ethan asked, his anger temporarily set aside. The heart condition, Adrian's smile was sad and somehow final. Bad enough. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you are going to get. Adrian moved to the sideboard where a crystal decanter of whiskey waited. His hands shook slightly as he poured 2 glasses, and Ethan had to resist the urge to go to him to offer support. Is that why you never married? Ethan asked, accepting the glass Adrian offered him. Because you knew you were living on borrowed time? Part of it, Adrian admitted, settling back into his chair. The other part was that I could never forget the boy who used to curl up in that chair with a book, who trusted me completely, who looked at me like I hung the moon. That boy grew up, Ethan said, his voice harder than he felt. He learned that trust is a luxury he couldn't afford. Did he? Adrian's eyes searched his face, or did he just learn to hide his heart better? Ethan felt exposed under that penetrating gaze, as if Adrian could see through all the armor he had built around himself. You don't get to psychoanalyze me. You gave up that right when you chose to be cruel instead of honest. I was never cruel to you, Adrian protested. Cold, perhaps, distant, but never cruel. Cruelty isn't always about what you say, Ethan replied, moving to stand by the fireplace. Sometimes it is about what you don't say, what you refuse to acknowledge. You let me believe I was nothing to you, Adrian, that I was just a burden you couldn't wait to be rid of. Because the alternative was worse, Adrian said, quietly. The alternative was watching you sacrifice your future for feelings that would have destroyed us both. What future? Ethan laughed bitterly. You mean the one where I spent 6 years building an empire for the sole purpose of destroying you? That future? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying the amber liquid in his glass. I used to wonder what happened to you, he said finally. Whether you were happy, whether you found someone who could love you the way you deserved to be loved. And did I? Ethan asked, his voice challenging. Did I find someone to love me? Adrian looked up at him, and Ethan saw his own pain reflected in those gray eyes. Did you? No, Ethan said simply. I never did, because every time someone tried to get close, I heard your voice telling me I was nothing. Every time I tried to trust someone, I remembered the look in your eyes when you sent me away. Adrian's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor, and sending whiskey and crystal fragments across the ancient Persian rug. But he didn't seem to notice. His hand was pressed to his chest, his face pale with pain. Adrian. Ethan was beside him in an instant, his anger forgotten. What is wrong? Is it your heart? I am fine, Adrian gasped. But his breathing was labored, and his skin had taken on a gray tinge that terrified Ethan. Like hell you are. Where is your medication? Ethan was already reaching for his phone to call for an ambulance when Adrian's hand caught his wrist. No hospitals, Adrian said, his grip surprisingly strong. Please, There is nothing they can do anyway. The admission hit Ethan like a physical blow. What do you mean? Nothing they can do? Adrian leaned back in his chair, his breathing gradually returning to normal. It means I have maybe 6 months, if I am lucky. Maybe less if I don't, to take better care of myself. The room seemed to spin around Ethan. 6 months. 6 months. And he had wasted the first few days planning Adrian's destruction instead of what? What could he possibly do with the time they had left? Why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked, his voice breaking. Because it doesn't change anything, Adrian replied. You came here for revenge, and you have every right to it. My condition doesn't absolve me of what I did to you. Ethan stared at him. This man who had shaped his entire life, who had been his first love and his greatest heartbreak. Sitting there in the firelight, Adrian looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than Ethan had ever seen him. I used to dream about this moment, Ethan said quietly, about seeing you again, about making you pay for what you did. But I never imagined, I never thought, that I was dying. Adrian, his smile was rueful. Neither did I, until recently. Funny how perspective changes when you realize your time is running out. I don't too want your pity, Ethan said, but the words lacked conviction, and I am not offering it. I am offering truth. Finally, the truth I should have given you 6 years ago instead of lies and cruelty. The fire crackled between them, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Ethan felt something shifting inside him, some carefully constructed wall beginning to crumble. Tell me, he said finally. Tell me the truth. Adrian looked into the fire, his profile sharp against the dancing flames. The truth is that I loved you, he said simply. I loved you from the moment you arrived here as a frightened 10-year-old, and I loved you even more when you grew into the most beautiful, brilliant young man I had ever known. The truth is that sending you away was the hardest thing I had ever done, and living without you has been a special kind of hell. Ethan felt tears threatening, and he blinked them back furiously. Then why? Why did you do it? Because I was 32 years old, and you were 18. Because I was your guardian, your stepbrother, the only family you had left. Because loving you the way I wanted to love you would have been selfish and wrong, and would have destroyed any chance you had at a normal life. That wasn't your choice to make, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. No, Adrian agreed. It wasn't, and I've regretted it every day since. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of 6 years of misunderstanding settling between them like dust. Finally, Ethan spoke. What happens now? Adrian looked at him, and Ethan saw love and regret and acceptance in his eyes. Now you decide whether you still want your revenge, he said. Because I won to fight you anymore. I am too tired, and there is not enough time left to waste on pride. Ethan stared into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood, turning everything to ash. He had come here for revenge, had spent years planning Adrian's downfall. But now, faced with the truth and the knowledge of Adrian's condition, he found that revenge tasted like ashes in his mouth. I need time to think, he said finally. Time is the one thing we don't have much of, Adrian replied. But take what you need. I'll be here. As Ethan left the library, he felt the weight of Adrian's words settling over him like a shroud. He had gotten what he came for, the destruction of Adrian's empire, the admission of love, the knowledge that he had been cherished all along. But victory had never felt more hollow. Outside his window, the snow continued to fall, each flake a silent witness to the wreckage of 2 lives that had been shattered by good intentions and prideful choices. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what to do with the truth. Tonight, he would mourn for the years they had lost and the time they would never get back. 3 days had passed since that night in the library. 3 days of awkward meals and stilted conversations as Ethan grappled with the weight of Adrian's revelation. The takeover was proceeding as planned. The board had voted unanimously to accept Blackstone Capital's offer, and lawyers were already drawing up the papers that would transfer control of the Morel empire to Ethan. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow, as if victory had robbed him of the very purpose that had driven him for 6 years. It was Sophia, Adrian's longtime secretary, who approached him with a proposal that would change everything. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, finding him in the estate's conservatory where he had been pretending to read while actually watching Adrian work in his study through the glass doors. "Might I have a word?" Sophia Restrepo had been with the Morel family for over 20 years, arriving as a young woman fresh from university and staying to become Adrian's most trusted confidante. She was the only person who truly knew the inner workings of both the family and the business, and Ethan had always suspected that she knew far more than she ever let on. "Of course," Ethan said, setting aside his book. "What can I do for you?" Sophia glanced toward Adrian's study, her expression concerned. "It is about Mr. Adrian. He is planning something, and I think you should know about it." Ethan felt his stomach clench with sudden anxiety. "What kind of something?" "A skiing trip," Sophia said, her voice carefully neutral, "to the family cabin in the Alps. He is arranged to leave tomorrow morning." "Skiing?" Ethan stared at her. "Sophia, the man can barely make it up a flight of stairs without getting winded. Why would he want to go skiing?" Sophia's smile was sad and knowing. "I think you know why, Mr. Blackwood. He has always gone to the mountains when he needed to think, to make difficult decisions. Even as a child, when his father would bring him there." Ethan did know. The family cabin had been Adrian's refuge, the place he retreated to when the weight of responsibility became too much to bear. But that was before his heart condition, before the constant threat of another attack. "He shouldn't go alone," Ethan said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "No," Sophia agreed. "He shouldn't, which is why I think you should go with him." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Why are you telling me this? Why do you care what happens to me?" Sophia's expression softened. "Because I've watched that man love you for 8 years, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen him make the hardest decision of his life to protect you, and I've watched him live with the consequences every day since. I've also seen what losing you has done to him." She paused, glancing again toward the study. "He won. T asked you to come with him. His pride won. T let him, but I think this trip is his way of saying goodbye to the mountains, to his memories, to you, and no one should have to say goodbye alone." The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a heavy blanket. "What makes you think he wants me there?" "Because I know him," Sophia said simply. "And because I know you. Whatever happened between you 6 years ago, whatever words were said or left unsaid, you still love each other. Maybe it is time to stop punishing yourselves for that." After Sophia left, Ethan sat alone in the conservatory for a long time, watching Adrian work through the glass. He was bent over documents, his concentration total. But even from this distance, Ethan could see the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the careful way he moved to avoid aggravating his condition. The rational part of his mind told him to let Adrian go alone. The man had made his choice 6 years ago, and now he would live or die with the consequences. But another part of him, the part that remembered being 10 years old and finding safety in Adrian's arms after nightmares. Could T bear the thought of Adrian facing whatever was coming next in solitude? That evening, Ethan found Adrian in his study, going through papers with the methodical precision of a man trying to tie up loose ends. "I hear you are planning a trip," Ethan said from the doorway. Adrian looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "News travels fast in this house. Sophia is worried about you." "Sophia worries too much." Adrian returned his attention to the documents. "But her concern is unnecessary. I've been skiing these mountains since I was a child." "That was before your heart decided to stage a rebellion," Ethan pointed out, entering the room uninvited. "It is not safe for you to go alone." "I am not asking for your permission," Adrian said mildly. But there was steel beneath the polite words. "No, you are not. You are just planning to disappear into the mountains and hope for the best." Ethan moved closer to the desk, noting the stack of sealed envelopes beside Adrian's elbow. "What are those?" "Letters," Adrian said simply. "Things that need to be said before it is too late." The casual way he spoke about his own mortality made Ethan's chest tighten with panic. "You are not going up there to die, are you?" Adrian's smile was sad and somehow peaceful. "I am going up there to live, Ethan. Maybe for the last time. There is a difference. I don't. To see one. Then you are not looking hard enough." Adrian set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan's face. "Why do you care what I do with the time I have left?" It was a fair question, and one that Ethan wasn't sure he could answer, honestly. "Because despite everything, I don't want you to die alone in some godforsaken mountain cabin." "And what do you propose instead?" The words came out before Ethan could stop them. "Let me come with you." Adrian's expression did change, but Ethan caught the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible catch in his breath. "That is not a good idea." "Why not? We both adults. We can manage a few days in the same space without tearing each other apart." "Can we?" Adrian asked quietly. "Because I am not sure I can be that close to you and maintain the distance we established. I am not sure I can pretend that having you near me doesn't feel like coming back to life." The honesty in his voice made Ethan's heart race. "Then, Dawn, pretend." They stared at each other across the desk, 6 years of hurt and longing hanging in the air between them. Finally, Adrian nodded. "The helicopter leaves at 9 in the morning," he said. "Dress warmly." The Moreau family cabin was a rustic masterpiece of glass and timber, perched on a plateau high in the Swiss Alps, with a commanding view of the surrounding peaks. Ethan remembered it from childhood visits. The massive stone fireplace, the panoramic windows, the sense of being suspended between earth and sky. It had always felt magical to him, like a place where ordinary rules didn't apply. Now, as the helicopter deposited them on the landing pad and lifted off again, leaving them alone in the pristine wilderness, Ethan felt the weight of isolation settling over them. They were miles from the nearest town, accessible only by helicopter or a treacherous mountain road that was impassable in winter. For better or worse, they were committed to whatever would happen here. "It is exactly as I remembered," Ethan said, shouldering his pack as they approached the cabin. "I haven't changed anything," Adrian replied, his breath visible in the thin mountain air. "I always liked it the way it was." The cabin was warm and welcoming, the heating system having maintained a comfortable temperature despite their absence. Adrian moved through the familiar space with practiced ease, checking systems and settling in with the efficiency of long habit. Ethan watched him, noting how the altitude seemed to be affecting his breathing, how he paused more frequently than necessary to rest. "You should take it easy," Ethan said, as Adrian began building a fire in the massive fireplace. "The altitude can be good for your heart." "I've been coming here for 30 years, Adrian replied. But he didn't argue when Ethan took over the fire. "Building duties. My body knows these mountains." "Your body is also slowly dying," Ethan said bluntly, then immediately regretted his harsh words when he saw Adrian flinch. "Yes," Adrian said quietly, settling into one of the leather armchairs that flanked the fireplace. "It is, which is why I wanted to come here one last time, to say goodbye properly." Ethan got the fire started and sat in the chair opposite Adrian. The flames crackling between them, like they had in the library days before. Outside, the floor, to ceiling windows. Snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes that would soon transform the already pristine landscape into something even more ethereal. "Tell me about the letters," Ethan said after a moment. Adrian was quiet for so long that Ethan thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "One for Sophia, thanking her for her loyalty and friendship. One for the board, explaining my decisions. One for my cousin Marcus in Geneva, settling family business." He paused, staring into the fire. "And one for you. What does it say?" "Things I should have said 6 years ago. Things I should have said every day since." Adrian looked at him, and Ethan saw the weight of regret in his eyes. "Things I am still too much of a coward to say to your face." "Try me," Ethan said softly. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It says that loving you was the best thing I ever did, and losing you was the worst. It says that every day for 6 years, I've wondered what you were doing, whether you were happy, whether you ever thought of me. It says that I am sorry for being too proud and too afraid to tell you the truth when it might have mattered." Ethan felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "What truth?" "That I didn't send you away because I didn't love you. I sent you away because I loved you too much to let you waste your life on someone who could give you what you deserved." "And what did I deserve?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything," Adrian said simply. "A normal life, a normal love, a future that wasn't shadowed by scandal and whispers. You deserved someone who could stand beside you in the light, not someone who had to hide in the shadows." "That wasn't your choice to make," Ethan said, echoing his words from the library. "No, it wasn't, but I made it anyway, and I've paid for it every day since." Adrian leaned forward in his chair, his eyes intense. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the loneliness, not the regret, not even the knowledge that I had hurt the person I loved most in the world. The worst part was wondering if I had been right, if you had found someone better, someone who could love you the way you deserved to be loved." "I told you the other night," Ethan said. "I never found anyone because of me, because of you," Ethan agreed. "Because every time I tried to let someone in, I measured them against you, and they all came up short." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of 6 years of separation hanging between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and Ethan found himself thinking about time. How much they had wasted, how little they had left. "What happens now?" he asked. The same question he had posed in the library. "Now we have 3 days," Adrian said. 3 days before the helicopter comes back. 3 days to, I don't, to know. Figure out what we are to each other now. And after that." Adrian's smile was sad. "After that, you go back to London and live the life you built And I finished tying up loose ends, and then I stopped fighting, Adrian said simply. I stopped taking the medications that make me feel like a ghost of myself. I stopped pretending that I have years instead of months. I let nature take its course. The casual way he spoke about giving up made Ethan's chest tighten with panic. You can, just give up. I am not giving up. I am accepting reality. Adrian looked at him with eyes that held too much pain and too much love. I am 50, 5 years old, Ethan. I have end-stage cardiomyopathy. Even with treatment, I have maybe 6 months. Without it, maybe 3. But those 3 months might actually feel like living instead of just surviving. Ethan stared at him, this man who had shaped his entire life, who was sitting there calmly discussing his own death as if it were just another business decision to be made. I won to let you do this, Ethan said, his voice fierce. I won to let you just fade away. It is not your choice to make, Adrian said gently, using Ethan's own words against him. Then, whose choice is it? Mine, finally. After all these years of living for duty and responsibility and other people's expectations, this choice is mine. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving the snow against the windows with increasing force. They were truly isolated now, cut off from the outside world by weather and distance, and the weight of everything that had gone unsaid between them. 3 days, Ethan said, finally. 3 days, Adrian agreed, as they prepared for bed in the cabin, as guest rooms, separate rooms, by unspoken agreement. Ethan found himself wondering what 3 days could possibly accomplish. They had 6 years of hurt to overcome, a lifetime of regret to address, and the shadow of death hanging over everything. But maybe, he thought, as he listened to the wind howl through the mountains, 3 days was enough. Maybe it had to be. The storm hit during the night, transforming the already treacherous alpine landscape into something primordial and dangerous. Ethan woke to the sound of wind screaming through the peaks, rattling the cabin's windows with a violence that spoke of nature's absolute indifference to human frailty. Through his bedroom window, he could see nothing but white, a wall of snow so thick it seemed solid. He found Adrian in the kitchen, already dressed and brewing coffee, with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to mountain weather. But there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there the night before, and when he turned to greet Ethan, his face was pale. How bad is it? Ethan asked, accepting the mug Adrian offered him. Bad, Adrian said simply, moving to the window that faced the landing pad. The helicopter won to be able to get through this for days, maybe longer. Ethan joined him at the window, peering through the driving snow. The landing pad was already buried under several feet of fresh powder, and the wind was creating drifts that grew even as they watched. So we retrapped, Ethan said, though the word didn't carry the fear it should have. Completely. Adrian's smile was rueful. I should probably apologize. If I hadn't insisted on this trip. Don't Ethan interrupted. I chose to come. We were both here because we wanted to be. They spent the morning in comfortable domesticity, preparing meals and maintaining the fire, settling into the rhythm that mountains demand of their visitors. But as the day wore on, Ethan noticed Adrian moving more slowly, pausing more frequently to catch his breath. The altitude and stress were taking their toll, and there was nothing either of them could do about it. It was mid-afternoon when Adrian collapsed. Ethan was in the kitchen, preparing tea, when he heard the crash from the living room. He found Adrian on the floor beside the overturned coffee table, his face gray with pain, his hand pressed to his chest. Adrian, Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, his hands hovering uncertainly. What can I do? What do you need? Pills. Adrian gasped, gesturing weakly toward his jacket. Inside pocket, Ethan found the small bottle of nitroglycerin tablets and pressed one under Adrian's tongue as he had seen done in movies, praying that he was doing it right, slowly. The worst of the pain seemed to pass, and Adrian's breathing became less labored. Better? Ethan asked, helping Adrian sit up against the couch. Better, Adrian confirmed, though his voice was weak. Thank you. How often does this happen? More frequently lately, Adrian admitted. The attacks are getting stronger, lasting longer. The medication helps, but he didn't. Finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Ethan helped him to his feet and settled him in one of the armchairs by the fire. Adrian looked exhausted, as if the attack had drained what little energy he had left. The sight of him so vulnerable, so obviously declining, made Ethan's chest tight with an emotion he didn't want to name. You should rest, Ethan said, adjusting the blanket around Adrian's shoulders. In a moment, Adrian caught his hand as he turned to go. Ethan, if something happens to me here, nothing is going to happen to you. If something happens, Adrian continued, his grip surprisingly strong. There is something you need to know. The takeover, Blackstone's acquisition of Morel Financial. I could have stopped it. Ethan stared at him. What do you mean? I had offers from 3 other firms, better offers than yours. I had board members willing to fight for the family legacy. I could have made your takeover impossible. Adrian's eyes met his, and Ethan saw truth and pain in their depths. I chose not to. Why? Ethan asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. Because you wanted it. Because after everything I had taken from you, I could bring myself to take this too. Adrian's smile was sad, and because I hoped that success might bring you some measure of peace. Ethan felt the last of his anger crumble, leaving behind something raw and painful and infinitely more honest. You let me destroy you. You did. Destroy me, Ethan. I destroyed myself 6 years ago, when I chose pride over love. You just finished what I started. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of revelation settling between them. Outside, the storm continued to rage, sealing them off from the world and forcing them to confront truths that had been festering for years. I never wanted to hurt you, Ethan said finally. I know, and I never wanted to lose you, but we both got exactly what we deserved, didn't we? You got your revenge, and I got the consequences of my choices. Is that really what you think? That this is what we deserved? Adrian looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw exhaustion and acceptance, and something that might have been peace in his expression. I think we were both too proud and too stubborn for our own good. I think we've wasted 6 years being miserable when we could have been. He trailed off, shaking his head. Could have been what? Happy? Adrian said simply. We could have been happy. That night, as the storm reached its peak, Ethan lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about happiness, about time, about the cruel irony of finding truth, just as it became too late to matter. Down the hall, he could hear Adrian moving restlessly, probably unable to sleep due to pain or medication or the 1,000 regrets that seemed to gather force in the dark hours. He found himself getting up, padding barefoot through the cabin to Adrian's room. The door was ajar, and he could see Adrian silhouetted against the window, looking out at the storm. Can T sleep? Ethan asked softly. Too much noise, Adrian replied, not turning around. The wind, the house settling. my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Ethan moved to stand beside him at the window. The storm was magnificent and terrible, turning the familiar landscape into something alien and dangerous. When I was a child, storms used to terrify me, he said. I would lie awake convinced that the wind was going to tear the house apart. And now I find them beautiful. All that power, all that chaos, and we safe inside, watching it happen. Are we safe? Adrian asked, and Ethan knew he wasn't talking about the storm. I don't know, Ethan answered honestly. But we here, and that has to count for something. Adrian turned to look at him then, and in the dim light, Ethan could see the boy he had fallen in love with all those years ago. The young man who had been too proud to admit his feelings. The broken man who had been carrying the weight of his choices for 6 years. Ethan, Adrian said, his voice barely above a whisper, if I told you I loved you, really loved you, not as a brother or a guardian, but as a man loves another man, what would you say? Ethan felt his heart stop, then start again with painful intensity. I would say it is about time you told me the truth. And if I told you that sending you away was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that I've regretted it every day since, I would say I know. I would say I forgave you the moment I understood why you did it. And if I told you that I am terrified of dying without ever having the chance to love you properly, the way you deserve to be loved. Ethan moved closer, close enough to see the rapid pulse at Adrian's throat, to smell the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with medicine and exhaustion. I would say we still have time. Do we? Adrian, as hand came up to cup Ethan, as face, his thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. How much time do we have, really? Enough, Ethan said, leaning into the touch he had craved for 6 years. We have enough time. When Adrian kissed him, it was gentle and desperate and full of 6 years of longing. Ethan felt something inside him break open, some carefully guarded part of his heart that had been waiting for this moment, this permission to love the man who had shaped his entire life. They moved together toward the bed, their movements careful and reverent, as if they were handling something precious and fragile. And perhaps they were. This moment, this chance, this love that had survived abandonment and revenge and the inexorable approach of death. Are you sure? Adrian asked, his hands trembling as they framed Ethan's face. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Ethan replied, and meant it. They made love slowly, carefully, with the desperate tenderness of people who know that time is running out. It was nothing like the frantic passion Ethan had imagined during his teenage years, and everything like the completion he had never dared to hope for. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, listening to the storm rage outside and feeling, for the first time in years, at peace. I love you, Adrian said into the darkness, his voice rough with emotion. I have always loved you. I love you too, Ethan replied, tightening his arms around the man who had been his first love, his greatest heartbreak, and now, finally, his heart's completion. I never stopped. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, as if they could hold back time itself through sheer force of will outside. The storm began to ease, though neither of them noticed. They had found their own shelter from the chaos, and for now, that was enough. Dawn brought an eerie silence that was somehow more unsettling than the fury of the storm. Ethan woke to find himself alone in the bed. Adrian's side, still warm, but empty. Through the window, the world outside looked like something from a fairy tale, pristine and beautiful and utterly transformed by the night. As snowfall, he found Adrian in the kitchen, moving slowly as he prepared breakfast. There was a serenity about him that Ethan had never seen before, as if some long carried burden had finally been set down. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked, studying Adrian. "His face for signs of pain or distress. "Better than I have in months," Adrian replied, his smile soft and genuine. It was perfect, Ethan. Thank you for that." There was something in the way he said it that made Ethan's stomach clench with sudden anxiety. It sounded too much like goodbye. "The storm's passed," Adrian continued, moving to the window that faced the valley below. "The helicopter should be able to get through by this afternoon." "Good," Ethan said, though he felt anything but relieved. Rescue meant returning to the real world, to lawyers and board meetings, and the complicated logistics of their new reality. It meant facing the question of what came next for two men who had finally found each other just as time was running out. They spent the morning in comfortable companionship, tidying the cabin and preparing for departure. But as the day wore on, Ethan noticed Adrian becoming increasingly quiet, increasingly distant. It was as if he was already beginning to withdraw, to prepare himself for another separation. "We need to talk about what happens next," Ethan said as they sat by the fire after lunch, waiting for the sound of helicopter rotors. "Do we?" Adrian asked, not meeting his eyes. "Yes, we do. Last night changed things, Adrian. We can. Just pretend it didn't happen." "I am not pretending anything, Adrian." His voice was careful, controlled. "Last night was beautiful, and I'll treasure the memory of it for however long I have left. But it doesn't change the fundamental reality of our situation." "What reality is that?" "That I am dying, Ethan. That I have maybe 3 months if I am lucky. That you have a life and a career and a future. That doesn't include watching someone you love waste away." Ethan felt anger flare in his chest. "Dawn, I get a say in what my future includes. Not in this." "Adrian." His voice was firm, final. "I won ask you to watch me die. I won ask you to put your life on hold to play nursemaid to a man who should have had the courage to tell you the truth 6 years ago. And I won let you make this decision unilaterally," Ethan shot back. "We not children anymore, Adrian. We both adults who can choose how we want to spend whatever time we have left." "Time," Adrian repeated, his smile bitter. "Always comes back to time, doesn't it? We had all the time in the world 6 years ago, and I wasted it. Now we have none, and you want to pretend that 3 months of watching me deteriorate will somehow make up for 6 years of separation." "I want to pretend that love matters more than time," Ethan said fiercely. "I want to pretend that finding each other again is worth fighting for, even if the fight is short." They stared at each other across the space that had seemed so intimate just hours before. Adrian's face was a mask of pain and resignation, while Ethan felt his heart breaking all over again at the thought of losing him twice. "You don't understand," Adrian said finally. "You've never watched someone you love die slowly, by degrees. You've never had to pretend to be strong when all you want to do is fall apart. I won to put you through that, and you don't understand that losing you the first time nearly destroyed me," Ethan replied. "Do you really think losing you again will be any easier just because you decided it is for my own good?" The sound of approaching helicopter rotors cut through their argument, growing louder until it seemed to fill the entire cabin. Through the window, they could see the aircraft circling, looking for a safe place to land in the deep snow. "That is our ride," Adrian said, standing and moving toward his packed bags. "Adrian, wait." "It is too late, Ethan." Adrian His voice was tired, defeated. It was always too late. Last night was a gift, a moment of grace that we probably didn't to deserve. But it is over now. The helicopter landed with a whump of displaced snow, its rotors creating a whirlwind that obscured the windows. Ethan watched Adrian gather his things with methodical precision, preparing to walk out of his life once again. "So that is it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the aircraft. "We go back to being strangers. We pretend last night never happened." Adrian paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "We go back to being what we should have been all along. Two people who loved each other enough to let go." "That is bullshit, and you know it." Adrian turned back, and Ethan saw tears in his eyes for the first time since they had arrived at the cabin. "Maybe it is, but it is the only way I know how to protect you from what is coming. I don't. T need your protection." "Yes, you do." Adrian. S voice was gentle, final. "You just don't to know it yet." The helicopter pilot appeared at the door, stamping snow from his boots and looking apologetic about the delay. "Sorry about the wait, Mr. Moreau. Weather was too rough to fly yesterday. Ready to head back?" "Ready," Adrian said, shouldering his bag. The flight back to the estate passed in tense silence, both men staring out their respective windows at the pristine landscape below. Ethan felt numb, hollowed out by the whiplash of finding love and losing it again in the span of 24 hours. Beside him, Adrian sat rigid and controlled, giving nothing away. It wasn't tea until they were back at the mansion, standing in the grand foyer where their conversation had begun days earlier, that Ethan made his decision. "I am withdrawing the takeover offer," he said, the words coming out in a rush. Adrian turned to stare at him. "What? You heard me? I am withdrawing the offer. Blackstone Capital will find other opportunities. Moreau Financial will remain independent. You can do that. The board has already voted." "The board voted to accept an offer that I am now rescinding," Ethan said firmly. "Without Blackstone as backing, they have no choice but to maintain the status quo." "Why, Adrian?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I love you," Ethan said simply. "Because I am not going to let you spend your last months fighting to save something that I am trying to destroy. Because maybe if you don't have to worry about the business, you can focus on what? On us. On whatever time we have left." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name. "It won. Change anything," he said finally. "I am still dying. We still can have a future. Then I'll have a present," Ethan replied, "however long it lasts." Something cracked in Adrian. His carefully maintained composure. "Ethan, I can ask you to." "You are not asking. I am choosing. We both choosing." Adrian stared at him for another moment, then closed the distance between them in two quick strides, pulling Ethan into his arms with desperate intensity. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice muffled against Ethan's neck. "Are you absolutely sure? Because once we start this, once we let ourselves believe in this, I won to be able to let you go again." "I am sure," Ethan said, holding him tight. "I've never been more sure of anything." They held each other in the grand foyer of the house where they had grown up, where they had fallen in love, where they had lost each other and found each other again. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside, in the warmth of each other's arms, they had found something worth fighting for, even if the fight would be brief. 3 months, Ethan thought. They had 3 months to love each other properly, to make up for 6 years of separation, to create memories that would have to last a lifetime. It wasn't too much time, but it was what they had. It would have to be enough. 2 months later, the final avalanche came not with the violent roar that mountain climbers fear, but with the gentle inevitability of snow accumulating on a weak slope until the weight becomes too much to bear. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March, when the world outside was beginning to show the first tentative signs of spring. Ethan found Adrian in the library where they had shared so many conversations, both as children and as the men they had become. He was sitting in his usual chair by the fire, a book open in his lap, but his eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and labored. The manuscript of his memoirs, a project he had started after they decided to face his illness together, lay scattered at his feet where it had fallen from nerveless fingers. Adrian? Ethan dropped to his knees beside the chair, his hands gentle as he checked for a pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular, fighting a battle it was destined to lose. Adrian. Eyes fluttered open, focusing on Ethan, his face with effort. "Hey," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hey yourself," Ethan replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Adrian admitted. "So tired." Ethan reached for his phone to call the doctor, but Adrian's hand caught his wrist with surprising strength. "No," Adrian said. "Please, we talked about this." They had talked about it. Long conversations on quiet evenings about dignity and choice and the right to die on one. His own terms, Adrian had made Ethan promise. No hospitals, no last-ditch efforts to prolong the inevitable. No desperate measures that would only delay what they both knew was coming. "I am scared," Ethan confessed, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Don't, to be," Adrian said, his thumb stroking across Ethan's knuckles. "This isn't an ending, love. It is just a pause. A pause? A pause." Adrian's smile was peaceful, accepting. "I don't to believe in forever, Ethan. But I believe in this moment, and I believe in what we've had these past 2 months. That is enough for any lifetime." They had been good months, despite everything. Difficult, yes, as Adrian's condition deteriorated, and the reality of his diagnosis became impossible to ignore. But they had also been filled with a kind of intense, desperate happiness that Ethan had never experienced before. They had traveled when Adrian was strong enough. A week in Prague, long weekends in Paris, quiet days exploring the villages of the Swiss countryside. They had made love with the passion of people who knew that every touch might be the last. They had talked through the nights when pain kept Adrian awake, sharing memories and dreams and the 1,000 small intimacies that make up a life together. Most importantly, they had forgiven each other, not just for the events of 6 years ago, but for all the small failures and disappointments that accumulate between people who love each other. They had made peace with the time they had lost and embraced the time they had found. "I need you to know something," Adrian said, his voice growing weaker. "These 2 months with you, they've been the happiest of my life. Not because of what we did or where we went, but because I finally got to love you properly, without shame, without fear, without reservation." Ethan felt tears streaming down his face, but he didn't try to stop them. "I love you too. I love you so much it feels like my chest is going to explode." "Good," Adrian said, his eyes beginning to drift closed again. "Hold on to that feeling. When you remember me, remember that we were happy. Remember that we found each other in the end." "I will," Ethan promised. "And Ethan, Dawn, to let this break you, You have so much life left to live, so much love left to give. Promise me you won, to waste it. I promise, Ethan whispered, though he couldn't, to imagine a world where loving someone else would be possible. Adrian squeezed his hand one last time, his grip already loosening. Thank you, he said, for coming back, for staying, for loving me despite everything. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. Adrian's smile was the last thing Ethan saw before his eyes closed for the final time. His breathing grew shallower, more irregular, until finally it stopped altogether. The library fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the sound of Ethan's quiet weeping. Sophia found them there an hour later, Ethan kneeling beside Adrian's chair, holding his hand as if he could somehow call him back through touch alone. She didn't say anything, just covered them both with a blanket and sat down in the chair opposite to keep vigil. The funeral was small and private, attended only by those who had truly known Adrian, rather than those who had merely done business with him. Ethan gave the eulogy, speaking about love and redemption and the courage it takes to admit when you've been wrong. He didn't mention the years of separation or the revenge plot that had brought him back. Those were private pain, not for public consumption. Afterward, as the last of the mourners departed and Ethan stood alone in the cemetery, Sophia approached him with an envelope. He asked me to give this to you, she said quietly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Adrian's careful handwriting. Ethan, if you are reading this, then the time we feared has come and gone. I hope you are not alone as you read this. I hope Sophia is with you, or Marcus, or someone who can remind you that grief is just love with nowhere to go. I want you to know that these past 2 months have been a gift I never expected to receive. You gave me the chance to love you properly, and you let me die knowing that I was loved in return. There is no greater grace than that. But now, I need you to do something for me. I need you to live, not just exist, not just go through the motions, but truly live. Fall in love again. Yes, again, because what we had was real and beautiful and shouldn't be the end of your capacity for love. Build something, create something, help someone, make the world a little better for having you in it. The business is yours now, if you want it, the estate, the money, all of it. But more than that, you have my blessing to use it, however you see fit. Make it count for something. I don't believe in forever, but I believe in the echo of love in a life well lived. Be my echo, Ethan. Be living proof that love matters, that redemption is possible, that even broken things can be made beautiful again. All my love, always. Adrian. P.S. There is something buried under the oak tree behind the library. Something I wanted you to have. Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Tomorrow, he would dig up whatever Adrian had left for him. Tomorrow, he would begin the long process of learning how to live with the weight of love and loss. But today, he stood in the snow beside Adrian's grave and made his own promise to the man who had shaped his life in ways both wonderful and terrible. He would live, he would love again, if he could manage it. He would make their time together count for something. The snow continued to fall, each flake a small benediction, covering the world in white. And somewhere in that pristine silence, Ethan thought he could hear an echo, not of words, but of love itself, reverberating through the mountains and finding its way into every corner of his heart. It would be enough to last a lifetime.